Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm bringing you a special episode of the Bokeh Podcast today called Workflow Wednesday. During these special edition episodes, myself and my co-hosts will focus on helping you develop more efficient daily and weekly workflows around post-production, communication, task and project management, time management, file and image management, and yes, the list does go on. We're going to save you an incredible amount of time in your work week, and we promise not to be too nerdy. This podcast is brought to you by Photographer's Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Visit photographersedit.com. Welcome, everybody, back to Workflow Wednesday. It's been a couple of weeks. Hey, Rich and Heather and Haylee.
Hello. Good to see your faces.
Thank you for being here. And it's kind of fun to just jump right into the conversation because we didn't really have much of a chance to chat before we got started. So catch us up a little bit. What have you been up to the last couple of weeks? Haylee, we'll have you start.
Yeah, just working a whole lot, working on some new things for Photographer's Edit and Bokeh Podcast, and just really excited for that.
Cool. Yeah. And you and I know that we have a big meeting scheduled for tomorrow too. So for those of you who are PE fans and Bokeh Podcast fans, you can look for some exciting things coming here pretty soon. But Haylee, I'm going to pop your website up here on the screen for those of you that are watching on Facebook Live. Of course, for those of you listening on the podcast, if you go to facebook.com/photogsedit, PHOTOGSEDIT, you can watch the video version of the podcast episode that you're listening to. And then for those of you who are watching the video version, you can see this after the fact, or I'm sorry, listen to this after the fact at bokehpodcast.com. I popped that up on the screen there as well. But Haylee, in addition to working with Photographer's Edit, is also a consultant and a photographer. And so I've put her website up there on the screen, HayleeGaffin.com. You can go take a look at some of her work and the services that she offers as well. And then Rich and Heather, what have you guys been up to?
Oh, getting back into the school routine, which there's things about that are so great. More of a schedule, more of a routine. I welcome that. But then on the flip side of that is it just comes with its own challenges because you are more regimented, less time. I am a homeschool mom. And so my entire, a good bit of my day has been taken up with that. So yeah, and a lot of parenting and schooling and a lot of life type things have been taking our focus lately. So,
yeah, it is easy to get distracted. First of all, just having life to deal with, the day-to-day, what seems like sometimes very mundane can ultimately be distracting from business. But then, of course, having kids on top of that, and then homeschooling, I can only imagine. I've never homeschooled my kids. My parents or my mom did. I'm sure it was a massive task. I had 3 younger brothers, but even with 2, I can imagine that it's so much to juggle all at once, and then to try to help run a business on top of that, it's got to be pretty challenging.
Yeah, I don't know that I've been of much use to Rich for the past couple of weeks while
you've been great, sweetheart.
While we've been getting back into the routine of things, the beginning of a new school year has taken a whole lot of my focus and energy and attention. That's for sure. So, yeah.
Well, kudos to you, Rich, for being patient while Heather actually runs the household and homeschool and everything else, and you play on your computer.
Exactly. Those videos will not watch themselves. Okay.
That's awesome.
And by the way, I did put you all's website up on the screen as well, richsmithphotography.com or .net, whichever you please. And you can go check out Rich's beautiful photography there as well. Speaking of photography, I'm curious to get you all's take on the latest developments in the mirrorless camera world from Nikon. Any thoughts? Haylee, we'll start with you.
Oh my goodness. Oh, yes.
Well, I'm a Canon girl, so.
So what do you really think about it?
So the Nikon's the one that just released that they're only doing 1 slot for a memory card, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the big one.
I'm seeing that more than I'm seeing that topic more than I am the fact that they went mirrorless. I'd love to transition to mirrorless one day. It seems like a lot lighter of a camera than my full frame, but yeah, so.
Yeah.
I saw an interesting. Oh, go ahead, Rich.
I can't see much about it. I mean, like all I saw was definitely some controversy, some very passionate people who are professionals and they want to use this camera really bad, but they're like, without dual slots, then that's just a no-go for them, because they've gotten so used to having dual slots on you know, as a backup, as a you know, and so you know, no skin off my back. I'm a Canon guy as well. So yeah.
Well, and this of course naturally cracks up probably a lot of photographers, including I'm sure both of you, who are used to shooting, at least in the past anyway, with just a single card slot, and now it's something to throw your arms up about and complain about online. I think it's quite funny. I saw somebody argue you can't say that we used to shoot with one slot because it's not times past, it's current day, and this is technology that we should have. And I get the thought process there. I've also seen rumored that Nikon's going to release a quote pro version of this mirrorless line that may have that second card slot, so everybody can take a deep breath and relax. They'll get their second card slot. The thing that actually surprised me the most, though, honestly, was the lens choice. First of all, it's a minimal lens, number of lenses to choose from for this new platform. I'm honestly a little bit confused as to why they're not just leveraging the massive lens selection that they already had, rather than launching with a measly 3 lenses. That was certainly wouldn't keep me from purchasing the platform, but that was a little bit confusing to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether or not I'm no Nikon exec, but but again, you see when Apple comes up with a new product and they take all the USB ports out and all the other, you know, they just put USB-C in there. And everybody's like, "What?" You know, that, you know, and but they're looking way into the future, way more further in the future than we are. So they know where technology is going, and if what the stuff the stuff can't handle the old USB stuff, then I mean, like, you had to push forward, you know. So I mean, like, and that way, maybe Nikon's just trying to be the leader, just like Apple's trying to be the leader of pushing technology to a new level, you know. And so,
yeah, potentially. And I know that I saw a comparison earlier today, actually, between the Sony platform and the Nikon platform, and it was an interesting comparison. DP Review actually did a comparison of the two platforms. And it's a relatively early review, but there actually seemed to be, at least based on, and maybe even their review was a bit skewed, but based on their review, it seemed like this new camera is actually quite competitive in comparison to Sony. Sony seeming to have the major advantage when it comes to certainly the dual card slot, if that matters to people. I shot weddings for 7 years on a digital platform, and I think lost, I don't know, maybe a total of 100 images that whole time shooting on one CF card. But regardless, the dual card slot, of course, is something that Sony platform does have, and so does and they also have the autofocus tracking specifically on the eyes. And I don't know, have you played with the Sony platform at all?
No,
we have not
at all.
Okay.
No, we're too busy making money over here. So I mean, like,
no, it is funny as it is. It's a great point, because you know, a lot of these conversations around technology at this point in time kind of crack me up. I mean, people do find reason to get all up in arms about things that really, in the bigger scheme of things, have little bearing on whether or not
when it comes to running our business and satisfying clients and things like that.
Yeah, we use not the latest technology, especially in the camera realm, and I'm shooting with a 5D Mark III, and the Mark IV has been out for 3 years now or something. So I mean, like, it's an older camera, you know, but it works. I have no complaints from my clients, and we tend to focus more on running a business, marketing aspects of it. So some people do contact me like, "What's your recommendation for this for a camera?" I'm like, I don't ever look at like the latest.
We used to in the early days of running a business.
Yeah,
but
I know. I don't know what happened to it.
I don't know. We're not a hobbyist anymore. It's our livelihood, you know, and you have to make practical bottom line decisions that if something doesn't overwhelmingly benefit your business and your clients' lives, and it doesn't enrich, you know, your life in a really practical, tangible way, then it's really, for the most part, usually not the wisest financial decision to make.
But it's so weird for me because I'm a gadget guy. I love new gadgets. So
I'm totally with you there. Yeah.
You know,
I found a very similar thing though, like over the span of, I don't know, maybe the last 6 or 7 years, maybe a little bit less, that my interest in trying to have the very latest thing has kind of waned a little bit. Because you do realize bigger picture, it doesn't matter so much. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to explore the latest technology and even use it occasionally. Yeah. But to this very point, actually, and this is not something that I mentioned to you guys. We talked briefly before we started today's broadcast, and we were talking about the fact that I photographed a wedding this past week for some family members in the Seattle area. And this was the first wedding that I had photographed in over 6 years at this point. Yes. And it all just came flooding back. It was very much muscle memory. But the thing that I didn't mention to you is that I actually shot the wedding with a 70D, which is considered by most probably in the industry to be like a consumer level DSLR or a vlogger's camera that's got great video. And of course you can flip the screen around. So it makes vlogging and creating content a lot easier. But absolutely no issues with that camera. I mean, incredible imagery that you can create with it. And in fact, the image that I posted to social media is something I also didn't mention to you all or on social media. That particular image is a beautiful image at sunset with these gorgeous evergreens in the Seattle area. It's just stunning. If you've never been to Seattle before, you've got to go just for that scenery. But beautiful sunset, the background highly compressed, and the bokeh is beautiful, and the couple's kissing, and you can see the beautiful rim light on their bodies. And I shot that image with I think it's an 18 to 135 or something like that. Again, consumer, I'm putting in quotes for those of you who are listening to the podcast, consumer level lens, and yet beautiful imagery, which also, by the way, includes a stabilization technology built into it, which some of these so-called pro lenses don't have. Yeah. So it's all really using equipment intelligently, and certainly when it comes to, Heather, as you pointed out, the bottom line, you can't just buy the latest and greatest all the time, or it's going to hurt that very bottom line in your business. So I thought I'd at least bring it up. I thought it's a fun point of conversation, if nothing else. But
the most important thing is you shot with a Canon instead of not Nikon. That's the most.
That really is the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. That's the reason why it's so beautiful. So I mean, like,
Well, and I will say it was fun to as much as actually shooting a wedding and working with clients and the guests and family. It was actually one of the largest set of family portraits that I've ever photographed in my whole career, and it went brilliantly, very, very smoothly. And of course, kudos to the family and the bride and groom for making that easier. And we also had somebody there who was acting, who had done makeup that day, was also a family friend, and kind of helped coordinate things a little bit, at least with the portraits. And she had a list of the portraits and was just kind of feeding me the next group. And we just flew through those portraits very, very smoothly. But all that to say, it was still fun to be shooting. Rich, you pointed out that I was shooting with a Canon camera. I did, for all of my career, actually shoot on a Nikon camera. And I will still argue to this day that Nikon's menu system and even the ergos on the back of their DSLRs is significantly better, even easier to use, easier to access than the Canon system. But despite that, it was kind of fun to use a different platform, learn how to use a different platform, and utilize it to and understand that the various modes and how they worked best in various scenarios, and even navigate the menu system despite its inefficiencies. It ended up being a positive experience with that camera. So we'll leave the Nikon and Canon jokes alone for the moment. And let's actually, speaking of wedding day portraits, we're going to actually talk about wedding day portraits. And in addition to that, what really usually goes hand in hand, or at least in many cases goes hand in hand, the first look. And Rich, I know that you alluded, I think during one of our conversations in a recent episode around this series of wedding day workflow, that you actually had a really great workflow in place, or maybe Heather mentioned it, but I'd love to dig into that a little bit. So we'll kind of start with you guys, and we'll go to Haylee, and then I'll share a couple of things that I did this past week as well. But talk to us a little bit about how you manage that first look and then the portraits, do so efficiently and practically for the sake of the clients.
I mean, as far as like the first look, we really try to really talk to my clients, first of all, about the importance of the first look. I know we're talking to a bunch of photographers, but yeah, I mean, I have more freedom with the clients. I basically just tell my clients, hey, realistically, you'll get more photo. You've spent so much money with me that you want to get the most amount of beautiful photos of you guys on your wedding day, and you just will get more photos of you two if y'all do a first look. That's just this has been my experience, and let them make a decision. So, I basically get together. I'll have a conversation with my client on the phone or in person, and basically when we're doing their pre-wedding consultation, hey, there's a few ways in my career how we've done first looks. Normally, they'll just do the whole just walking up the bride walks up behind the groom and either hugs him from behind or taps him on the shoulder or does something playful, grabs his butt, that's happened a couple of times, which is great. But
anything to get him to laugh, right? I mean, this seems to be kind of your specialty, Rich. Do you go to the extent of encouraging the bride to do something like that just to get a reaction, a response?
Yeah. I mean, now I've been doing more of that whole idea of anticipation. There is anticipation already inside the first look, but I have learned that if before the first look, to literally just get them back to back, and then to read a letter that they not even out loud. They basically exchange a letter that they've written to each other, and they're literally standing back to back, holding hands, reading this letter silently, with the anticipation that they're about to see each other for the first time. That's incredible. Is this something that you learned elsewhere that you just came up with the idea for and started suggesting? No, it's just something that. I think one of my clients, they wanted to exchange gifts, and which is also great. And so I told them, hey, why don't we, instead of doing it because again, the tendency is do it around a corner or with a door separating between the two. But I'm forget the door, because that really limits the locations you can do this. How about we do it in the field with this beautiful location, and y'all literally stand back to back. Y'all still don't see each other, and y'all have this moment. Y'all can literally hold hands. Your backs are touching. Lots of points of contact between them, and they're having seen each other. And man, the amount of the emotion that's building up. I'm just throwing wood on the fire, but baby, and so and then by the time that they're ready to turn around, their emotions are sky high. And then, especially for guys,
Well, and Rich talks about this in the process of educating our clients about the pros and cons of a first look. One of the things that a lot of brides are reluctant to commit to the first look is because she wants him to feel this surge of emotion seeing her walk down the aisle for the first time. But the reality of it is that a private moment is much more susceptible to displays of emotion than a bunch of people sitting in the audience staring at the groom. His ability to show that emotion is typically actually toned down rather than amplified. And so this is just one of the things that I feel like Rich does really well in the process of educating them. Well, if that's what you're after, there's even a higher likelihood that you guys will be able to emote and have this meaningful moment together in this particular type of situation.
But it's been my experience that even with the first look, it's completely different type of emotion seeing your bride walk down the aisle. This is literally about to happen. You have the music, you have the people, and so the people who have great emotion during the first look, they still have. They're not going.
They're not bored.
I'm I've already seen you, so this is old hat. They're still wow, she's coming down the aisle slowly toward me, and it's still a very great emotional moment. The same amount of emotion than if they hadn't seen each other before the wedding. That's same really amount of emotion.
We have found that the first look. I mean, the bottom line is we found that the first look doesn't take away from the emotion of the walk down the aisle.
Definitely not. 100% of the time, it does not.
If he's going to be emotional, he's going to be emotional. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Okay. Yeah. And actually, Casey Jean, thanks for listening in, Casey Jean. She chimed in and said, yes, totally agree. First look is way more emotional. And I love the way that you guys are describing this because, and by the way, thanks for listening in, Case Jean. And for those of you who are listening or watching either one, don't hesitate to join in the Facebook Live session. We do this. Usually it's going to be every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Occasionally we're traveling or otherwise, but come join in the live video, ask questions,
Please ask questions.
Make silly expressions at us to get us to laugh. I mean, whatever you want to do, come join in the fun. But thanks for that comment, Casey Jean. But this is interesting because I don't think I've ever quite heard a photographer explain it this way and specifically go for. I mean, I prefer a first look as well because it ultimately meant it was actually more for the sake of having the freedom and the flexibility to capture even and have more time to capture even more portraits of the bride and groom. It had more to do with the time available for that than thinking actually specifically about the emotional response. So what percentage would you say, Rich, of your clients, once you give them this advice or the suggestion, what percentage of your clients now do a first look versus waiting until walking down the aisle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know specifically. I mean, most of my clients do a first look now. And so
an overwhelming majority.
Yeah, I mean, but it also depends on the time of year it is. So I mean, in August, July, June, you can afford not to do a first look, and I can still have plenty of daylight left, and available light. If we're doing your wedding in December 9th, we need to have a conversation, because you don't hey, if your expectation is to get these beautiful photos of you two, and it's pitch black outside, then we need to talk, So basically, I really push. Go ahead. Good.
Oh no. Go ahead.
I said I really push for the first look. Or if they're getting ready after daylight savings time, when it's getting darker at 6, 5:30, then in fact, I just did a timeline for a client who's getting married November 30th of next year, and so I didn't even give her a timeline without a first look. I'm like,
that's the way to do it.
And there's our answer. Conversation
over. One
over.
In charge. Yeah, that's kind of cool. How many? Okay, well, so I've got kind of multiple points or questions here, but to the point that you just made, how many times a year do you have the opportunity to actually write the timeline for a client? Because I don't think I've ever had that opportunity.
From the consultation, I say I want my hands on your timeline as much as possible, because as I tell them, as a photographer who is very experienced, I know how to create a timeline that will maximize the amount of amazing photos you receive on your wedding day. I like that I like to at least have the first draft, and then the wedding planner can get it and tweak it if they want to. But I like to at least have the first draft, because again, I know how I work. If I work with a wedding planner a whole lot, then they'll understand how I work as well. But I mean, if a wedding planner has me scheduled doing this thing that they schedule 45 minutes when I really need 15 minutes or even 5 minutes, whatever, I want as much input, and they're like thrilled. Oh, okay, whoa, they trust me. Hey, I can do this myself, or this person who has seen every scenario possible and knows exactly what's going to happen on my wedding day, and has seen the mistakes and the successes. I'm way more qualified to at least do the first draft and get really, really close to that final timeline. I write about probably about 95% of my timelines.
And I would say, of course, not every photographer is going to have the opportunity to be able to override or overwrite literally what the wedding coordinator is going to put together. And at that point, this is something we've talked about on a past episode or two, even the significance of communication, especially when it comes to working with a wedding coordinator. I mean, that's got to be the most important relationship that we have outside of our clients as wedding photographers, is with that wedding coordinator. And it takes communication, a lot of communication, and making sure that you're on the same page with a wedding coordinator. And especially if you work with somebody consistently over a time frame, They'll probably learn to the amount of time required and what suggestions you're going to make to the bride as the photographer, and they'll help craft the timeline accordingly. But to the point that you were making earlier, Rich, the problem with waiting to do or problem with not doing a first look, of course, for me anyway, as a photographer, was that all of those portraits then got pushed to after the wedding when things tended to get rushed and pushed, and the coordinators calling the bride and groom to come on over. The reception's starting or the cocktail hour is over, or they're ultimately problematic. Are we freezing up?
You are.
And we don't want to. Okay, let's see if we can get back. Here we go.
You're still pretty frozen.
Yeah.
Still pretty frozen.
You want to talk?
Those were some fascinating sounds that just came out of your microphone.
That was talent.
Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me, that's really odd. We have a crazy fast connection here, and I'm not sure what could be eating at bandwidth, but let me just go to solo mode. Sometimes that helps. But just to repeat, in case those of you who are listening and are watching didn't hear, I was just pointing out the fact, and pretty obvious one probably at this point, but pushing that first look, or in fact, negating the idea of a first look, waiting till the bride and groom see each other walking down the aisle, naturally meant pushing the portraits to after the wedding ceremony, closer to the reception when things tended to get rushed. And then I might only end up with, say 10 minutes to photograph the bride and groom. That was the last thing that I wanted. So that was the main point that I would make with the bride and groom, was for the sake of making sure that they had as much time as possible to be photographed, that it wasn't rushed. And of course, as a result, not as stressful. But this is really interesting, Rich. And I love your very proactive approach, and you have a tendency of doing things a little bit differently and very strategically. And so I appreciate your perspective on this. So talk to us a little bit more. How do you then transition from that first look, or maybe you have more to add to the topic of the first look, but then take us from that to the portrait session.
The portrait session just actually, for my perfect timeline, I don't have a portrait session after the first look. I immediately go into the wedding party, and then after that, and the formal family photos, and then I basically wait after the ceremony when the guests are they're flipping the venue, or the guests are going to the reception site. I like to get the bride and groom when they're officially married. And the emotions of that are still very, very high, and they're on this cloud that they can call themselves, "Hey, where's my husband? Where's my wife?" And it's very playful. The emotions are high. And the biggest thing is the light is much, much better after the reception. It's later in the day. The sun's lower on the horizon. I much rather do portraits at 6:30 versus 1:30. Where the first look may have happened. I'm very, very limited as far as where I can do portraits if the sun is at noon. We have some pretty harsh light around here in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area, especially in the middle of the summer, and it can get cloudy. And in fact, the weather recently has been kind of horrendous. But I should say prior to the last week, maybe, but a lot of clouds and certainly a lot of rain. But the sunlight that filters through the clouds here in Tennessee tends to be kind of harsh and naturally creates these really heavy shadows under our eye and under the client's eyes, and it makes it kind of brutal to photograph in that scenario. Yeah. Again, I really, really encourage my clients to do the portrait session after the wedding. And did you say that includes the family portraits as well? You push it all until after, or do you do the family? No. The family portraits are before. The only thing I do after the ceremony is I really, really encourage. This is one of my favorite points of the day. Is right after the ceremony, I encourage the wedding party and the immediate family, mom, dad, grandmothers, to come up and congratulate them. There's lots of hugs, lots of looking at the ring, lots of laughter, welcoming you to the family. There's a ton of emotion that happens. I call it the celebratory time. It takes 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm getting gold during that time. It is exactly what I'm wanting to get for a wedding. Then after that, After it kind of dies down a little bit, I let it naturally die down. I don't drag them away when there's a lot of emotion to be said. It takes, again, about 5 to 10 minutes. And then I take the bride and groom alone. And while everybody else is getting, going to get ready for the reception, I take them and we have just alone time. And I grab all these really great photos. The light's perfect. The emotion's perfect. And they're stress-free. They know that they get more photos because of it. And I get them into the reception faster. So your guests are waiting less. It's just perfect. It's just perfect.
Now, I do have a question about that because, to our earlier point of conversation, how do you avoid getting rushed during that portrait session? People are going to the reception. I know receptions differ. Sometimes they're, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours later. But in many cases, at least in the weddings that I photographed over the years, the reception was relatively soon after the ceremony. So maybe you had an hour at most. In many cases, maybe even less before the cocktail hour started. Yeah. How do you avoid rushing that portrait session in that situation?
I never rush. I mean, the portrait session's about 30 minutes long. And so by the time the guest kind of get seated and finish talking with people, the bride and groom are getting introduced.
And another thing that helps take pressure off him is he knows that I am at the reception site after the room has been prepared by the vendors, before the guests are there. And that for us is what we have figured out is the most efficient way to work together as a husband and wife team, is to have me there for that critical part of the day where I'm documenting all the details and he does not have to worry about that. So he's not rushing to get to the reception for any types of, I have to document the details. There's none of that. So me being there at that particular time of the day, I feel like is the most strategic part of the day for me to be there. So I'm documenting all the details. And then when he arrives,
it takes stress off of me. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's awesome.
So for the part where you were talking about right after the ceremony, when you encourage the family to go up and congratulate them, how do you get the bride and groom away from the family to actually get those pictures? Because I've always encouraged them to run and hide so that, the family gets over to the reception and they can take their pictures.
Yeah. So basically that is a great question. What I want their family to get there. I do not want them to be mobbed by their guests, because then I've lost control and I cannot get them away. So I figure out, if your guests are going this way, we go this way, and so it's just a natural thing where I know where the guests are going to naturally go toward, and we just go a different way. We just get them.
But he's right. Instead of squelching all that post-ceremony emotion, he maximizes it big time. So it's pretty incredible to see. I hear the shutter going off faster during that part of the day than any other time of the day. And those end up being some of the bride and groom's.
I'm a kid in a candy store. I'm a kid in this candy store for that time. I love it. It's awesome.
And so, when you think about the fact that some of those grandparents don't have a lot longer in this life, and everybody's together as a family, and this immediate family is congratulating the bride and groom. Yeah. These are raw, authentic, emotional moments, and that's probably going to mean more to the bride and groom than the posed portrait of everyone just standing there looking at the camera. And so these are the moments that make him come alive and remind him why he's doing what he's doing in the first place. Yeah. And if it weren't for those moments, I don't think he would enjoy. Yeah.
And during that time, I am focusing as a photographer more on the family members instead of the bride and groom. So example, if I'm hugging, if I'm the bride and I'm hugging a relative, then my face is going to be hidden. So as a photographer, I have two choices. I can either photograph this direction toward the bride's face or this direction toward the relative's face. And I'm going to always pick the relative's face, because I can get a ton of photos of the bride with somebody's, you can't even tell who she's the head, And but those are the photos that the bride and groom are going to really enjoy and be emotional over, because here's her grandfather hugging her, and this is what he's looking like. She could care less about what she was looking like during that time. If I can, that's great. If I get both faces, but if I'm going to choose, I'm always going to choose the relative's face. So
that's a really great tip, actually, and good thought process there. I want to get to Haylee and her tips here in just a second, but Rich, if you can just touch briefly on the actual family portrait session. Talk to us a little bit about how you make that go as smoothly and as efficiently as possible.
Yeah. If you can have a wedding planner. Okay. So just again, even with Haylee's point, with the guest, I mean, if you have a wedding planner is going to be corralling the guest. She's corralling the wedding party and the family one way, and she's corralling the guests the other way, because we're working as a team. Obviously, if there's not a wedding planner, then we just got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
The same thing for the family photos. I mean, if my method is not everybody's method. My method is to get really loud, and so I demand attention during that time. I basically tell my clients and my clients love it, because they know because everyone. Because what I do is I get loud, I get everybody's attention. I basically kind of give them a pep talk, like, "Hey, we're going to get through this as quickly as possible. If everybody can just kind of listen to me for just a little bit." I'm very kind, but I'm loud. But I have my Apple Watch, and I'm going through my Apple Watch, and I'm calling out names, and I already have my list. I know what order is. I normally start with the larger photo, and start taking people out, and then I just have everything kind of very, very organized, and so it goes really, really smoothly. I mean, everybody knows where we are on, and I'll even know, hey, so and so is on. Hey, you just stay right there. You're going to be next, and just I get through those photos in 10 to 15 minutes. I don't mess around with those photos.
Yeah, I'm always glad it's him. I love watching this part of the day. I don't stand around and watch. I mean, I'm photographing, but I like watching him in action during this part of the day, because he's not afraid to get a little bit bossy and get the job done. And I'm always thinking, I'm so glad it's not me.
But I'm kind of, right?
You're kind, but you're definitely bossy.
Right?
I'm
a kind boss.
Rich, I'm hearing that Heather likes this other side of you to come out every once in a while. You might pay attention to that.
Let's leave that there.
So yeah, all my clients do. They'll afterwards are like, "Wow, you were on it. You got through those so fast." We don't because I view the family photos as a necessity. But not many people enjoy. They're like, "Oh, I'm so excited to do family photos." It's like we do it because we got to do it, but we don't want to do it for an hour.
Yeah.
And the more organized it is, the more they feel like I'm in control. They get to relax. They're not stressing out because they have to be the one that's loud, or they have to be the one that's trying to corral people. They're the one, as long as they see that I'm in control, they're loving it. They're loving it. And even all the relatives will come up to me and be like, "You did it." It happens all the time.
Yeah.
So
I think
that's good stuff.
When I first started shooting weddings, I was more reserved and didn't take control of those situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd always feel like everyone was trying to figure out who was in charge. And finally, one day it just hit me. I'm the one that's supposed to be in charge. I have to be bossy here and make sure it's happening. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job, and it's making the day miserable for my clients. So
yeah, it's not easy to take charge in those situations for certain personalities, but the faster you realize that authority that you bring to the role is necessary in these situations and sexy. What can I say? I mean,
I think it's kind of funny because sometimes I play a role. I pretend that I know what I'm doing a lot more than because I do it for their sake, not my sake, because I know this photo is going to look great no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll do this. I'll kind of look at their feet, because they're making sure they're saying, "Oh, this guy's making sure my feet are okay, my jacket's okay, everything's perfect."
He must be amazing.
I'm just I'll silently do the yeah, you guys are looking great, and they'll take a photo, and so I'll even put on a little show for them.
Apparently everybody's getting a show. It sounds great, Rich. Thanks for the example and advice. Well, I do want to mention really quick, Casey Jean chimed in again, and she said, I probably create the timeline for 80% of my couples from the start. I talk about lighting and timing. They trust me and want me to help them get the best light. So I throw out a preliminary timeline before they even really talk to their planner about it. Gets me the best light.
I love it. And isn't it the best feeling when our clients trust us? I mean, that's the best. They may not be the ideal client in maybe some other ways. Not every client's going to be the ideal client in every aspect. But when your clients trust you to do your job and they're not coming to you and trying to micromanage or tell you how to do it, that's awesome, Casey.
Yeah. The more you find trust, the less photos they send you through Pinterest.
Yeah.
Like, well, I got to take control. I need you to get these photos for me. If they trust you, they'll let you do your thing. And which is great.
Well, and I really like that idea of proactively handing over a timeline. I suggest a timeline. I think that's a great idea. And again, it's important to collaborate. If there's a wedding coordinator, find that out. Proactively collaborate with that coordinator. It's always a good idea, but that's a really, really great idea. Haylee, let's jump to you. I want to kind of hear your tips and tricks for wedding day first look and portraits. Go for it.
Yeah. So most of it is pretty similar to Rich and Heather's, but for the first look, I usually, after getting married and experiencing it firsthand, how awkward it can be when if there are 2 videographers and 2 photographers and they're all pointing cameras at you right next to you, it can get very awkward. And so sometimes it's not the big picture you imagined, and the guy's not going to be all, oh my gosh, because that just may not be his personality. So I've kind of decided I'm going to step back during those first look moments, because it can get overwhelming for a bride and groom, or even if it's like a father looking at the daughter for the first time, it can be really awkward if they don't know what to do in front of a camera. So I've kind of stepped back from those moments and just let it happen. And I'm still capturing it. I may not be as close or get the angles that I would prefer, but I'm getting a more real moment from them. And then I do a portrait session of the couple right after that. And most of the time it's meant to get as many different angles as I can, and different shots, scenarios, different backgrounds, because most brides and their planners talk to you before, and they really want a bunch of different, or variety is really the key word there, is they want a variety of shots so that their family members can pick and choose what they want to print, and always making sure you get those prints or those poses for grandma and grandpa, because they don't understand why you're not looking at the camera. I learned that from my own wedding.
That's so great. But actually, to that point, I'm really curious, Haylee. So you're making the point about the importance of making sure that you get those kind of formal portraits. Rich, do you have kind of an alternative perspective on that? Do you still get those as well, or do you just kind of do what you feel the client, that the bride and groom are going to like the most?
It's a good question.
That's a good question. It varies from client to client. I mean, my ideal client is they want to see realness and genuineness, and they want to see connections. And so for those, I don't even get individual shots of the bride and the groom, because again, it's not telling a story. They're not connecting with anything except their bouquet or something, which is great. That's why I love to capture. We're on the same page. They want to see these photos of them enjoying each other, laughing and showing emotion. And
you still get the
but for a lot of clients, I don't get the ideal client for every single, and so for those, I'll still get those. I'll still get those kind of more traditional. I don't spend much time on them, obviously, but I'll get a few. Hey guys, look at the camera and smile, or get an individual bridal portrait and a groom portrait.
It's usually pretty quick, and
but it's not,
I wouldn't call it an afterthought, but it's certainly not the emphasis. It's not the main focus. But but
it is dependent on the client. You said as well.
It is. I want to have my fingers on the pulse of this client. You know, I want them happy, and so if that's important to them, we have a pretty good understanding. You know,
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah. Now, Haylee, I just wanted to make sure I understood something. So you're going from that the first look, or the kind of pseudo first look, to directly to the portrait session. Is that specifically of just the bride and groom, or are you also doing family portraits at that point?
It's bride and groom, and then I transition into bridal portrait or bridal party portraits, and then into family, then the ceremony. Okay. So it's everything's being shot before, and then I do take time after the ceremony if there are guests moving locations, or if there is time for us to take more photos, just because it allows you to, you know, capture anything you may have missed before, or get those emotions of we just got married. But yeah, so it's the couple, the party, the family, and then ceremony, couple again.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we lost.
Your ceremony. Oh, are we going again?
We're kind of, okay, I think you're back.
Nathan's doing the robot.
Are we back?
You're back.
Sorry about this for those of you watching or listening in. I know the audio and video today has been a little sketchy, and I'm not sure what's driving that. I've got my phone Wi-Fi turned off. I don't have apps sucking bandwidth.
Whenever we have any kind of technology problem, we're like, we have the best internet in the country. How can this be happening?
I know.
It's true.
We have a gig. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's kind of weird. Okay, I think we're back. And I think I'm losing track of where we were at now. But Haylee, you were saying then that you try to knock out all the portraits prior to the ceremony, and then if you get any after, that's just kind of bonus or gravy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And do you ever run into issues then with light, like Rich was talking about? If you're shooting, I mean, most of the ceremonies probably are going to start at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in that realm. During the summer, it's still going to be really light outside. Does that light affect your portraits?
Yeah, it does. And like there have been moments where, like, I had a July wedding, and the portraits that we took before the wedding were not the best. So having that time afterwards was better. It made for better lighting. We were able to retake some of the portraits that we took earlier that day, and they didn't realize it was happening because they just think we're taking bonus pictures. But so there are times like that. But usually, like in the fall, if they're having a 6 o'clock ceremony, their pictures are usually happening at like 3 or 4. And I can get all of that done within the time limit. Because I'm not spending a whole hour on a couple's photos before. It's usually, sometimes I'll schedule out around 45 minutes. It doesn't take that long. That gives them time. Like, she's been busy getting ready all day. It gives them time together before their ceremony. So we can take a break if they need to. They're not constantly smiling for, an hour and a half of photos.
And then as far as the kind of the philosophy, the thought process behind doing everything beforehand versus after, I mean, you're kind of alluded to this already, but I know Rich has really specific thought process that is driving his reasoning for keep kind of breaking it up. For you, the thought process behind that is ultimately to kind of minimize the stress after, or is there something else driving that?
Well, the stress after, but the majority or the main reason would be that most couples want to get to the reception. They don't want to spend the time taking photos. They just want to go party and have fun and eat. Eating's probably the biggest motivator to get to that reception. But for that, it makes their images not as beautiful if they're spending an hour after the wedding, between the wedding and reception, taking pictures, because they're just ready to go and see all their friends and family.
That's interesting. I think I'm extremely jealous of Rich's clients now, or maybe he's just doing that much better a job than I did of kind of managing expectations and creating a scenario up front that enables more time for those portrait sessions. But I can actually very strongly relate to what you were saying, Haylee. The clients that we worked with, and I mean, I had the opportunity to work with clients who only paid me $350 to shoot a wedding, to upwards of $10,000 to shoot a wedding. So a wide range of them, but the thing that I did find quite a bit was that particularly the groom, by the time we were finally photographing the portraits of the bride and groom after the ceremony, the groom was he was done. And wanted to get to the reception. And so I can very much empathize with you on that. Rich, do you not run into that at all? I run into that more in the summertime. Is more the heat that makes them done. In fact, I shot a wedding just a couple weeks ago, where
I wanted to take them out again to get some sunset shots. And she stepped outside. She goes, no, I'm sweating in places that she got really real, and she goes, I'm like, because I actually had to get them not into a car, but like one of those mule, the like a golf cart. It was a fairly, good
spread out
venue. And she just, I could tell, like I was trying to force her, and I wanted her to do it because these photos are going to be beautiful, but I can't force them if they're not. She just like sometimes because of the heat. It's normally because of the heat. Just to answer your question, it's normally because of the heat. They're just done. I'm sweating. I'm over it. I feel like we are faking it because we just want to get the AC again. It's just, and that's
which is a great reason not to have an outdoor summer wedding because it's miserable in this part of the country in the summertime. So
I don't take July weddings anymore. July is my least favorite month to get married.
Nice. Yeah.
That is something that we ran into. I know that we've in the past moved a portrait session indoors for that very reason as well. But I don't know. I guess, Rich, maybe part of it is that you're doing a really great job too of kind of getting the clients that you want. I know that you've talked about exceptions to that, but you're creating an expectation up front about what your brand represents when it comes to wedding photography, and then managing their expectations proactively. And I think we can all kind of learn from that a lot.
I do think that the average client who hires us knows why they're hiring us and is vocal about that, even from the first contact from the website, the form on the website. They're mentioning exactly why they're reaching out to Rich and what it is that they love about his work. And I think that by the time the engagement session's been taken and the wedding rolls around, they know exactly what it is that they're looking for and what's required to get what they want. And that's trusting him and going along and going out after the ceremony when the emotions are high and getting those photos. I just feel like not every client, but I feel like,
Yeah.
Well, again, kudos to you for that. And I've certainly learned something already in this conversation, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. I honestly, I'm going to kind of echo at least some of the things that we've talked about here. I don't so much have as much commentary on the first look because it was actually, I mean, if I were to look back over the hundreds of weddings that I shot, I would say probably upwards of 60, maybe 70% is high, but 60% at least of the weddings that I photographed, we didn't have the opportunity to photograph a first look. And then of course the resulting extended portrait session, if you will. And so I don't so much have commentary there aside from echoing what everybody has been saying, which is to make it happen. And I've never heard any photographer describe their process the way that Rich did today. So I think there's a lot to take away from the conversation about how to proactively encourage clients to do that very thing, and not only to have a first look and explain the benefits of it, but then also to set up a scenario where there's some beautiful, beautiful pictures to be taken. Do you have a lot of apprehension, Rich, from the bride and groom when it comes to the idea of actually writing something? That was a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, like not every client does it because sometimes it's the guy that's just not that's not who they are, and so I mean I roll with it, I love that. I love that. I love the letters simply because from a practical standpoint, if they're standing back to back and they're taking 2 to 5 minutes, however it takes to read this letter, I am going around. They literally probably get about 40 photos from that point by itself, and
they're amazing photos.
Because she's reading, she's tearing up, and he's, but you
can get the wide angle shots, you can get the tight shots.
I can take my time. They're holding hands. I want to get a tight shot of that. I got so much time, instead of her instead of being in one place, photographing her approaching the groom from behind, them snuggling, or and it's much really fast. It's just a practical thing for me. So so if I can talk them into it, I'm talking them into it. If it's not that, I'll try to talk them into exchanging gifts, because a lot of times.
Yeah. I know what you're gonna say.
Oh man,
we're all waiting with bated breath here. Please do share.
Oh man, I've had a couple of us times where the bride gives the groom a boudoir album, and it is amazing. The response. He's back to back with this girl, holding hands or not, and just looking at his album, and the looks on his face are just amazing.
Yeah. Not only did he know that she did this portrait session, but he doesn't know that she's made an album. And then,
it's such a surprise for him.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I'm marrying this girl. Like, he just can't believe it. He's like, I'm marrying I'm marrying this girl. Like he's in, and just, if you want a guy to show some emotion on their wedding day, give him a boudoir session. There are just so many. There's some great ideas, and depending on, again, the client and who they are and whatnot. So yeah.
Well, and I think, to your point, actually, it would be a great idea, even if the bride and groom aren't going to write something out ahead of time for each other, if they are going to give gifts, instead of having them, because the wedding that I photographed this past week, gifts were kind of passed on for the bride where she was and the groom where he was. Yeah. And it was kind of this individual session of opening the gift, and I'm capturing some photos of that. Yep. But to actually do that back to back, it's a great idea and a great suggestion. So this is really good stuff. I will just very quickly, though, mention the significance of something that we have already talked about briefly, but when it comes to a portrait session, and I can't remember now if I said this on air or right before we get started, but the portrait session, the family portrait session that I photographed this last week was one of the longest list that I've ever photographed. And despite that, it was one of the smoothest family portrait sessions that I've ever photographed. One, because the bride was highly organized to begin with. And there may have been some kind of proactive expectation management on her part with family members. But in addition to that, having somebody who actually wasn't a coordinator, just somebody that was there, that was doing makeup, a family friend, who had a list that the bride had printed out or somebody had printed out of this portrait or these family portraits that needed to be captured, and literally just feeding me the next group after group after group after group. I picked a location in the shade with a decent background and of course, ultimately good light. And as a result, I'm able to just place them in that location and I'm fed the next group. I photographed that. And similar idea with the individual bride with the bridesmaid shots or groom with the groomsman shots. We were just knocking them out really, really quickly because I'd set up the shot already and I'm being fed kind of the next person. And that particular scenario makes it so much easier. So even if, I know, Rich, you mentioned earlier the idea of having a wedding coordinator there to help with this, but even if you don't, and in fact, in some cases, it may be more effective to have a family member who can yell at somebody without hurting feelings or can get onto somebody and get them to hurry up. Somebody just give them a list and ask if they wouldn't mind helping sending you the next family group. That really speeds things up and makes things so much more efficient, and you can get through those family portraits so much more quickly, which then of course leaves you more time to photograph the bride and groom before the ceremony, in addition to whatever you may be capturing after the ceremony. We did actually, so I had prior communication with the bride and let her know when we talked about the time for sunset and when it might be best to actually take advantage of that light to photograph additional portraits of the two of them. And so in addition to the portraits that we captured prior to the ceremony, including the family portraits, we also then at about 7 o'clock or so, after they had been announced into the reception, I think people had started eating. In fact, the bride and groom even got a little bite to eat. They then exited. They kind of motioned to me that they were ready to, or she motioned to me that they were ready to go do this portrait session. And then we had, I don't know, probably about 20 minutes, maybe even a little bit longer, where I was able to take them out into this vast open field. And if you go to my Instagram, it's Nathan, Nathan Holritz, Holritz. You can see the image from this past week. Vast open field, beautiful evergreens in the background, and this gorgeous, gorgeous sunset. I was able to photograph them in that open field and in amongst some kind of tall grass, and where it was able to get some beautiful portraits from that particular scene, and within a relatively short amount of time. But again, because it was planned, there was communication ahead of time. We were able to take advantage of that, and that was really, really important too. So I would say, first of all, to have a list ready, a printed version of that list ready that you can hand to somebody, whether it's a wedding coordinator or a family member or a close friend, to help you manage that family portrait session to get through them as quickly as possible. And then make sure that there's very clear communication ahead of time. And Rich is really the best example of this here, managing the client's expectations ahead of time. Hey, if you want the pictures that you see on my website or in my portfolio, this is what we need to do in order to get them. Managing the client's expectations ahead of time is really, really important. And I love that you shared all that with us. Anything, you guys, that you have to add to this conversation here before we finish up?
I don't think so.
I was going to ask Rich, because I know you mentioned during engagement sessions, you play music in one of our previous episodes. Do you do that during your first look or during those portrait sessions with your couples?
No, I'm not opposed to it, but I haven't done that before. I'm not opposed to it though. I mean, again, like that would be just another log in the fire. But I'm not sure. I think my thing is to play Barry Manilow. I don't know. I don't know what to throw on the fire. No, I really don't.
You don't bring that little speaker to wedding days.
No, I have it.
It's in your camera bag?
Yeah, it's in my camera bag. I just don't. Okay. I don't use it.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to it though. I should at least try it at least once. You know, just see what happens. So
sparked a little inspiration there.
Yeah.
So yeah. So no, I don't. No, I just try to kind of come up with scenarios in which I'm kind of getting genuine emotion. Like for example, like Nathan mentioned, individual photos with the bride and the bridesmaids. Instead of I will ask. I'll get basically my safe shot, them looking at the camera, smiling, and then I basically tell the bridesmaids to like really turn to the bride and say. That doesn't work with every client, but I mean, again, but I'll tell them, say, I want you to finish this sentence. I want you to turn and say, I love you because, and then all they have to do is finish that sentence. And so the crazy bridesmaids, they were like, I love you because that time we went to Las Vegas, and then they were, but then you have the more serious ones. They're like, I love you because your heart is so pure, and then they have a little, but it allows their personalities to come out,
I like that. That's really cool.
And so
that's a great idea.
So anyway, that's just
awesome.
That's really, really good stuff. Yeah. Well, thank you again, both Haylee and Heather and Rich, all three of you actually for sharing in this. And thanks again for Casey chiming in too. She actually said, I always get the most of my clients to agree to a first look when I explain the old traditions about why, and I'm sorry, I'm covering people's faces up here with about why they normally wait until they walk down the aisle to see each other. It was when they had arranged marriages and they'd wanted to wait until the very last minute to see each other. Right. Hence why they used to wear the veil over the face so they wouldn't run away.
Yep.
So that's definitely another approach.
Exactly.
Add a little bit of perspective to the conversation.
Exactly.
But ultimately, it's all about managing the client's expectations. I think that's been the theme today. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us. Thank you guys so much for sharing. For those of you who are watching live, do remember you can go to bokehpodcast.com and we actually have these episodes there. And of course, ultimately on Spotify and Stitcher and Apple Podcasts and anywhere that you really might listen to a podcast episode. These episodes go out later on Wednesday. And so you can listen to those again. For those of you who are listening on the podcast, just come back to facebook.com/photogsedit. And you can watch the live video. And every once in a while, particularly Rich makes things a little bit interesting. And you're going to want to actually watch the video. So make sure you come back and take a look at some of the video from our live sessions as well. Thank you guys again for sharing today.
Good to see you guys. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. Everyone have a great day. Thanks for listening in and watching in. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.